Hi guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. So today I want to do my reading year in review for 2019. I'm going to be going over some of my bookish stats as well as doing the end of year survey tag, I guess, that is out on YouTube. There is no original creator for this tag that has been listed, so the person that I got my questions from was Gabby from Gabby Reads, and I will link her 2019 reading survey down below, as well as all the questions that I'm going to be answering as part of this survey. So let's get into this and go over what I read this year. So before we get into any of the questions for the survey, I thought I would go over some of my bookish stats. So in 2019, I read 172 books. That's a lot. I have never read that much before, ever. Like, that's over double what I've ever read in a year. And I attribute that a lot to being on BookTube and participating in a lot of readathons, and also the types of books that I've been reading, and we will get into that in a minute. So as far as genres go, I read 32% just general fiction books. This includes any contemporary books that did not have a romantic element to them. I have a really hard time deciphering between what's contemporary and what's just general fiction, especially when it comes to books that were written in years like before 2000. So I just kind of lumped it all into general fiction unless it had a romantic element, and then I would put it under romance. As far as other genres that I read 8% nonfiction, almost 9% science fiction, 15% fantasy, 16% historical fiction, 6% classics, and I attribute that to the Betsy Tacy read along because that encompassed the bulk of the classics that I read this year. 3.5% was mystery thriller, almost 9% was romance, and 1% was poetry. So that is an overview of the genres that I read this year. As far as format goes, I read 48% audiobooks. So when I say that I read a lot of audiobooks, I'm not lying. The bulk of my reading is audiobooks, and I attribute that to my lifestyle. I am a mom of 4 kids. I listen to audiobooks a lot. I listen to them in the car. I listen to them when I'm doing housework. I listen to them when I am getting ready for the day. And that is how I am able to continue reading given my lifestyle. So I say I read 172 books. Half of those were audiobooks. And I'm okay with that. I embrace that. I'm okay with that. I would like to start reading more physical books, but I'm okay with that. Of the physical books that I read, 25% of them were graphic novels. And then the other 20%, I had 20% physical and 6% ebooks. So that doesn't exactly add out to 100, but I'm kind of rounding on a lot of these numbers. So I did read a portion of my books on ebooks, a very, very small portion. I really don't read ebooks except when I'm going to bed at night. That's the only time I read ebooks. So, and that's just so my husband can sleep and I don't have to have the lights on. So those were the formats that I read. As far as where I got my books from, 70% of my reading was done via library books. So 30% of the 172 books were books that I owned. Everything else I got from the library, and I love that number so much. I utilize my library so much, and I absolutely love my library. I love taking my kids to the library and just encouraging their love for the library, and I love supporting my library. So that I am definitely okay with, and I hope that that number stays at least 50-50, if not above, on the library aspect of it. Now, as far as age group of books that I read, I also say I read a lot of middle grade, and I'm not lying. 53% of the books that I read this year were middle grade. So 34% were adult, and then 12% were YA. Once again, that probably doesn't add up to 100, but I'm rounding, so there's that. But like I said, 53% middle grade. I read a lot of middle grade. I love middle grade. It's easy for me to comprehend. I'm not stupid by any means, but after a long day, I have a lot of mommy brain issues and I just need something that's simple. And I love reading middle grade. They can be really hard hitting while still being easy to read. And I love that about it. So I am definitely okay with continuing to read a lot of middle grade, and I hope that I will always continue to appreciate middle grade. I would like to up my adult reading quite a bit, but I love that my YA has gone down quite a bit compared to years past. In years past, I've read a lot of YA, and I'm definitely starting to get completely away from that. I had a very, very small percentage of my reading was YA this year, and I am definitely okay with that. As far as ratings go, I rated 18% of my books 5-star books. I had 48% were 4-star, 27% were 3-star, just over or just under 6% were 2-star, and then I had 0.5%. I had one star book. So that was how my ratings kind of balanced out over all the books. And then my average rating was 3.78. Which is pretty good. I'm okay with that. I had a lot more 5-stars than I thought I did, but I love the way that it all kind of filtered out. I would like to get to reading more things that I'm excited to read and see if I can get that number up a little bit in 2020, but overall, I'm happy with that. Now, as far as how my books fell over all of the months and how many books I read per month, you can see here that 17% of my reading was done during March, and I attribute that to middle grade March. I read 29 books in March, and yeah, so that was a lot, and they were all middle grade, so that's expected. And then second place for how many books I read in a month, tied were May and October, and those both had 20 books apiece, and that was 12% of my reading, and I have no idea why those were high, but they were. In October, I took place in 2 different readathons, and then I also had my Scythe-along read-along that month, so I knew I had read a ton in October. Didn't know that I had read that much in May, though, so that was kind of fun to see. And then coming in right after that was July with 18 books, and that was when the reading rush was. So that's to be expected as well. So that is how many books I read per month. It averaged out to 14.3 books a month. I would like to get that a little bit lower in 2020. I just don't want to read quite as much in 2020. It really consumed a lot of my life, and I'd like to maybe explore some other new things this year. So there is that. So that is all of the stats that I am going to share. And now we're going to get on to the book survey questions part of this video. So the first question is, how many books did you read this year and did you meet your goal? And I read, like I said, 172 books, and I way exceeded my goal. I originally set my goal at 52 books, and then I quickly surpassed that and upped the goal to 75 books, and then quickly surpassed that, and then I set it to 100 books and decided I was going to quit messing with it after that, and I way exceeded that. So yes, I met my goal. The next question is, what is your most read genre? So like I said before, my most read genre was fiction, but that includes contemporary fiction, so I don't know how you really want to decipher that. And that was 32% of my reading, and then second to that was historical fiction at 16%. So, and that kind of is to be expected. Those are the 2 genres that I am most attracted to, so there's that. What is your longest book that you read? The longest book I read this year was Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett at 976 pages. I read this as a read-along, and it was a chunker. I ended up giving it, I think, 3 stars. It was good, but I don't think I'll be continuing in the Kingsbridge series. I may be interested in someday picking up more of Ken Follett's work, but he writes really big books, and they're very intimidating, so we'll see. And then, what is the shortest book you read this year? The shortest book I read this year was called Moon Cop. I think it's by Tom Gould, and that was 94 pages. It was a graphic novel that I picked up at the library. I kind of got stuck in the library because it was downpouring, and so I just grabbed a graphic novel and read it really quick all in one sitting, and I didn't really care for it at all. I gave it 2 stars. So there's that. What was your favorite book that was published in 2019? Of all the books that I read that were published in 2019, my favorite one was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is a contemporary romance that it has a hate to love trope in it. It's about these 2 people that kind of are forced to go on a honeymoon together, and they end up falling in love. So it was really, really good though. I really like the way that it all played out. I'm not a huge romance reader, but I really like this one. So, and that was my favorite of the books published in 2019. All right. All right. What was your favorite debut book in 2019? And my favorite debut of all the ones that I read, given I don't read a lot of new releases, so keep this in mind. But my favorite was The Dearly Beloved by Carol Wall. This is a book that recently came out, and I just had seen it be bopping around on a lot of people's favorites list, and I ended up reading it in December, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't love it. It was not my favorite of the year by any means, but it was very interesting. It's historical fiction. It's set in the 1960s, and it is about these 2 different couples, both of which the male is a minister. And so one of the ministers is just very devout and loves, God, and is complete faith in God, and his wife is an atheist. And then the other guy basically became a pastor to pay the bills. He doesn't really have a solidified faith. He believes in man doing good and using his faith and his church to be able to do good as far as society goes, but he doesn't really have a firm faith. But his wife is a pastor's daughter and has a very, very firm faith. And so it's just, they kind of get hired to pastor a church together, and it's their story. And it was very interesting. And it's just kind of like a family saga sort of thing. It was really good though. And I did not know at the time that I picked it up that it was a debut, because it was very, very well written, if nothing else. So that was my favorite debut. What was your favorite book not published in 2019? And for this one, I have to say Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This was my favorite book of the year. And yeah, so this definitely, I love this book. I've gushed about this book so much on my channel. It is about a town in Sweden that is a hockey town. The town is completely obsessed with hockey, and one night the star player on the hockey team rapes the GM's daughter, or the manager of the hockey team's daughter. And it's just about the fallout of that, and it's told from every perspective of every person in town, and it's so, so, so good, and I love this so, so much. And yeah, hands down, favorite book I read this year that was not published this year. All right, what is your least favorite book of the year? And this, hands down, has to go to my singular 1-star read of the year, The Cinderella Pact by Sarah Strohmeyer. I read this as part of my reading the 5 books that have been on my TBR the longest project, and kind of wish I would have DNF'd it. I don't give out 1 stars. This was the only one that I gave out this year, purely because the subject matter was just not acceptable in my opinion. It is about a woman who basically decides to lose weight to try to get a guy. And the whole book revolves around the fact that if she loses weight, then she will be more attractive to men. And in the end, the guy ends up falling in love with her because she lost the weight. And it just sent all the wrong messages to me. I did not approve of it. I honestly don't know why I finished it, but that was my least favorite book of the year. All right, the next question is, what was your biggest disappointment of the year? And for this, I have to say King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I loved the Grisha trilogy and Six of Crows duology. Loved. And I was so excited for King of Scars because Nikolai was one of my favorite characters amongst both of those book series. And I did not like this book at all. Not even a little bit. I think I ended up giving it 2 stars. It just didn't jive with me. There was so much in it that was completely unwarranted. It didn't make sense. I didn't care for it. And I kind of felt like it was forced. And yeah, did not like this one. Huge disappointment for me. The next question is a book that lived up to the hype. Once again, I have to say Beartown because I feel like this book is very hyped, and I was kind of nervous going into it. Totally lived up to the hype. A book that did not live up to the hype, and for me, this is hands down Educated by Tara Westover. This is another book that I did not care for at all, and that's a really unpopular opinion, I know. I gave this book 2 stars. This book just felt like the author, it's hard to say this because it's a memoir, and so it's this author's real perception of what happened. And the only thing that I can say about it is that this book just felt like what was happening, what the author was writing about was still too fresh for her to be writing about it. I feel like if she would have waited a few years to write the book, she would have gained perspective and had some time to heal from some of the things that she was going through, and it would have brought more clarity to what she was writing about. This just felt like an angry letter to her parents and her family, and I didn't care for that at all. Also, the whole like way that this book is pushed is saying, you know, here's this woman who, you know, was raised out in the boonies and didn't get an education because her parents were survivalist, which they weren't. But her parents didn't provide her an education. And so she took it upon herself to make sure that she got an education. And then she went to graduate school and ended up at Cambridge, I think, or Oxford, one or the other. And, you know, kind of made her own education and how that was so important. However, in the book, there's so much focus on what happens before she goes to college. And then it's like, boom, boom, boom. She goes to college, she gets this scholarship, she gets that scholarship, she passes these tests, and voila. And there's no focus on how she was able to actually pass these tests and get these scholarships and achieve what she achieved. It just kind of all miraculously fell in her lap. And I just didn't like that. So I did not care for this book, and I really don't think it lived up to the hype, considering it was being hyped by Bill Gates and Michelle Obama and every person under the sun. I did not understand why this book was receiving the praise that it was. All right. The next one is what book felt like the biggest accomplishment? And for this, I'm going to either say Pillars of the Earth, because it was forever long and it had been on my TBR for a long time, and I was so proud of myself once I finished it, or The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, because this had been on my TBR for forever and I finally read it. This has been on my TBR for at least 5 years and I just hadn't ever read it, and I loved it once I finally read it, and I'm so happy that I finally got around to getting this one done. So I definitely feel very accomplished that I got that done. All right, the next one is your favorite character, and my favorite character in any book that I read this year was Beauty from If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Murray. Beauty in this book is a 50-year-old Black woman living in South Africa during apartheid, and her perseverance and acceptance and ability to love through hardship was so inspiring. Like, I want to be Beauty when I grow up, because she was just the epitome of everything that is good in this world, and I loved her so much, and I just completely fell in love with her, and I can't wait to maybe someday hear more about Beauty and Robin's story. Bianca Murray has said that their story isn't over yet, but we'll see if we ever get another book about them, because I loved that book so much, and that character. And then your least favorite character, this hands down has to be William Hamley from Pillars of the Earth. He's the villain in this book. He's written as a villain. He is disgusting. He is vile. He was written to be that way. It's supposed to be that way. I hated him so much. Wanted to punch him in his junk. Throwing that out there. But that was definitely my least favorite character. All right. Next, we have the most shocking book or moment. And for this one, that's not the right book. And for this one, I'm going to say The End of Thunderhead. This is the second book in the Arc of the Scythe series. I have not read The Toll yet, but the last chapter or whatever in this, oh my goodness. I was like, wait, what? What just happened? No, that did not just happen. Yeah. So hands down, most shocking thing that I read in a book, jaw to the floor. Loved it. All right, next question. Your favorite couple in a book. And for this one, I'm going to say Lauren and Ryan from After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was probably my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I read this year. I read all of her books except The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I read last year. I read everything else that she wrote this year. And I loved this book and I loved these characters. This book is about Lauren and Ryan, who are married. They've been together for 11 years and they're just kind of not feeling it anymore. They've been fighting a lot. There's just a lot of negative stuff going on in their relationship. And so they decide that they're going to separate for a year, no communication with each other at all. And at the end of the year, they're going to come back together and decide if they want to get divorced or if they want to stay married. And it's just their kind of exploration during that time. And I loved this book. It made me cry at the end. I just thought it was so fantastic. And my husband and I have been married for 11 years. And so I think that kind of influenced how much I loved this book. But I love these two characters and I love their kind of what they learned about each other throughout the book. So that's all I'm going to say. But I love them. All right. The next one is the book that you push the most people to read in 2019. And for this, I'm going to say either Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth, which is like one of my favorite middle grade books that I read this year. I have it lent out to somebody right now because that's how much I've been pushing people to read it. Or Hum If You Don't Know the Words. I bought a second copy of this because I want to be able to pass it out to people to read because it was that impactful and I loved it so much. So one of those two, I think, would be the ones that I've pushed the most people to read either on the internet or in real life. These are the books that I'm telling people in my real life that they need to read. The next one is your favorite book cover of the year. And for me, I'm going off of the books that I read this year, not the books published this year, because I read so much backlist. And my favorite cover of any book that I read this year is The Dreamer by Pam Munoz-Ryan. I love this cover. Like you can tell it's all shimmery, all the way around it is. It's so pretty. I love it so much. But anyway, close up. There we go. Oh, love this cover. It's gorgeous. And I found that in a thrift store and could not believe it. I was so excited. So that's my favorite cover. Your favorite book adaptation that you read and watched this year. And for that one, I'm going to say a really old one. The book's old and the movie's old. Jurassic Park. I read this during the reading rush in July and I loved this book. And then I watched the movie right after it. And the movie is just so good. The sequel is horrible, The Lost World, and the movie's just as bad. But the original movie is just iconic and the book was so good. And so, yeah, this was my favorite book to movie adaptation that I read this year. What book made you cry the most? For this, I'm going to say either Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth, because, yeah, I cried a lot. Like, heaving cried on that. Or Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson. This one, I got teary-eyed and I cried a little bit. And then I listened to like the author's note at the end of the audiobook that I listened to and realized that this book was written by Catherine Patterson in order to deal with something that had happened to her son. And that just kind of all brought all the feelings out as a mom. Like that just affected me. And then I watched the movie adaptation and like was heaving, sobbing, could not control myself. Like my husband had to take the kids out of the room because I was scaring them crying so bad. Holy bananas, did this book just broke my heart into all the pieces. Like I'm gonna start crying thinking about it. This book just made me sob. So those are the ones that made me cry. What book made you laugh the most? This one is going to go to Class Mom by Lori Gelman. This book was hilarious, especially as a mom of elementary school kids. This is about a mom who has 2 kids in college and then has a kid in kindergarten and she gets roped into being class mom. And she is just the funniest. She sends she sends emails to all the parents, and they're just witty and sarcastic and funny, and it's about all the things that she has to deal with as class mom that are hilarious. And I love this, and I laughed out loud reading this. And the sequel came out this year, You've Been Volunteered. That one was funny too, but I like Class Mom a little bit better, so I'm gonna say that one. All right, the next one is a new favorite author that you discovered this year, and that hands down for me has to be Bianca Marais. I read both of her books this year, and I love her writing style. Is just so good, and I cannot wait to read more from her. But she's definitely a new author that I had never read before this year that I absolutely love now. So hands down, those two are hands down, she is my favorite author I discovered this year. All right, the next one is your favorite book that you reread this year. And that's pretty easy for me because I reread exactly one book this year. Luckily, I loved it, so this one's going to Matilda. And yeah, I don't reread books very often, but I was doing a readathon. And one of the challenges was to reread a childhood favorite, and that was Matilda, and I loved it. This book is just perfection. I love this book so much. If you don't know what Matilda's about, it's by Roald Dahl, and it is about Matilda, who is a genius, and her parents don't think she is, and even if she was, they think that it's ridiculous that she would want to read books or be smart because it's more important to be pretty and be able to swindle people. And so because she doesn't have an outlet for all of her knowledge, she discovers that she has the ability to manipulate objects with her mind and like telekinesis, and so that plays a part in it. And then she develops this really close bond with her teacher, her kindergarten teacher, and it's just it's so sweet, and I love this book so much. So that was my favorite reread. What is the best nonfiction book that you read this year is the next question. And that, without a doubt, has to be Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. I loved this book. Oh my goodness, this book was so good. And this is the story of Louis Zamperini, who was an Olympic track athlete in the 30s. And then he was enlisted in the war during World War II and was a bombardier in the Air Force. And he was shot down over the Pacific. He survived in a raft in the Pacific for over 40 days. And then eventually was picked up by the Japanese and taken to a prisoner of war camp in Japan. And it was just horrific, the things that he went through. And this book was just, oh my goodness, impactful. And I got to learn so much more about the Pacific side of World War II because I didn't really know a lot about that before this. And I love this book so, so much. Hands down, my favorite nonfiction that I read this year. All right, and then the last one is, were you happy with your reading year? And I was. I had a very good reading year. I felt like it was rushed, and I felt like I read too much. I felt like I wasn't taking the time to really appreciate the books that I was reading and to really sit in them and, kind of let them marinate in my brain. Especially after I got done with them, I would bounce from book to book pretty quickly. And I think this year I just kind of want to slow it down a little bit and let my thoughts kind of simmer on things as I'm finishing them up and, just slow down. And yeah, but other than that, I did have a very good reading year. So that's going to do it for me today. As always, if you have read any of the books that I've been talking about or have questions about any of them, please leave your comments down below. I would love to hear what you think about anything. And other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya!